Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It is your favorite YouTube wannabe celebrity, Professor Hamamoto, coming to you on August 24, year 2025, 4 p.m. PDT. Welcome, one and all. Hi, Corky. and the one other person that's in the live stream. Hopefully, it'll populate more and more as we get into it, because this is truly going to be an incisive talk, a disquisition on a field of academic inquiry that not only flies beneath the radar, but is being lionized for being some sort of innovative scholarly pursuit. And as you can probably infer from my, I guess, barely disguised sarcasm in my tone of voice, you might correctly infer that I'm skeptical about all these truth claims that are being made by practitioners within the discipline, within the field of criminology, but also by people who write about so-called true crime, including the journalists, two of whom we will talk about today, primarily via their, I guess I would call it a decent piece of work, right? I'll show it to you right now. It's called The Idaho 4, An American Tragedy, right? This is about the slayings of the 4 undergraduates at the University of Idaho. And it's by James Patterson and Vicky Ward. You might recognize her name as being associated with the research on one Jeffrey Epstein. And that case still goes on. It just goes on and on and on. And those of you who read crime fiction might recognize James Patterson. I'm not a student of his. I don't think I've read any of his books. So I might be misidentifying, but if I'm correct, I think he's primarily a writer of not true crime, but crime fiction. And there is a distinction there. And it's a distinction that's lost by a lot of not just casual observers or even participants, but by experts in the field. And I'll explain a little bit more what I mean by this. I am after what might be called in scholarship, because that's my world, right? And I don't say this to denigrate strong journalism. I learn a lot from books such as this and other fine pieces of work. I do tend to disparage all the tube pop-up pundits, especially those specifically that have showed up where it comes to the exploitation of so-called true crime. And this particular case attracted all the bottom feeders that you could imagine. And again, there's a profile. Typically, they're women. Typically, they're in their mid to late 20s. And typically, they speak with vocal fry. That's their shibboleth, right? That is their way to distinguish those who are in the know, right? It's like teen lingo, the slang, or student lingo. You know, they hate it when you adopt their terms or you say something positive about their group. It's their property, right? There's a sense of ownership and possessiveness where it comes to these types of pursuits. That's why I put cult in the title. Welcome, everybody in the live chat. Welcome to the discussion here. Because it has cult-like characteristics. And I'm not talking about the pop-up pundits, right? The people who've trying to make a name for themselves as TikTokers. who, by the way, as you might imagine, Patterson and Ward, they don't spend a lot of time on it, but whatever mention there is of these people, they're quite dismissive of them. I am on a certain level. However, I should tell you, I'm not completely dismissive of them. If they say something provocative, then I will follow up on it. For example, there was a lot of chatter early on about a possible Colombian drug cartel involvement in these murders. And this has been dismissed out of hand by Patterson and Ward. And I came across a book recently. It's just been published. By the way, let me take the opportunity to thank you, all my patron supporters that support me, that allow me to buy these books right off the press. These are hardback copies. They're getting more expensive all the time. But I came across another fresh off the press book, hardback, because I needed to get it. I needed to read it, and I've started it already. I'll do a more complete review later. And it's about a domestic drug cartel at Fort Bragg, one of the major military installations in the continental United States. And we have literally hundreds of them all over the world. People keep talking about, oh, China is so paranoid, Russia's so paranoid. Well, if your countries are ringed by hostile forces, military bases, fully stocked and armed, and they have a mind to encircle you, then you would be on the defensive as well. I'm not trying to explain away some very complex geopolitical issues here, but I'm saying that this is a fact of American post-war life, in particular, post-World War II. And it indeed precedes that, of course, because history is continuous. And I mention the history because some of these so-called criminologists at Washington State University, where Bryan Kohberger was a first-year student in a doctoral program, and their neighboring, right across the border, state border, their neighboring institution, the University of Idaho, their faculty, they have a epistemological, a scholarly blind spot that's huge. And the primary purpose of the talk today is to fill in some of the areas that these people are blind to in historical reality. And part of it is because they're hiring people in the name of diversity, equity, and inclusion. They're hiring a bunch of foreigners to talk about American crime, primarily from Francais, from France, infiltration. I keep hearing these right-wing commentators talking about the Chacon infiltration of this, that, and the other institution, and that is true. But if you come from a friendly European country like France, or Britain, of course, you get a pass. Or Israel, even better. I mean, they hold a trump card over all of them. Right. But I am very much aware and sensitive to these types of ethno-racial national politics as they play out and their practical implications. And I'll give you more specific examples of why these hiring patterns, primarily women, by the way, in criminology, and secondly, foreigners. And that's intentional. And of course, it's being done under the guise of DEI. And that itself is not talked about by your retooled comedians on TubeView. They're still laughing it up about Michelle Obama being a man, or Madame Macron possibly being a man. You know, they're on that level. They're real infantile. And that's why they're allowed to flourish and they're subsidized in such a fashion, right? I'm looking at it deep in a deeper sense. And if you want to call it meta commentary, let's do it. Meta commentary. This is commentary. This is reportage version 1. I'm taking it to the next level. And I'm telling you this not because I'm better than these people, more insightful. They were on the ground. I assume they went out there and did some digging around themselves on foot. Right. Not to denigrate them, because we're partners in this, and you're a partner in this too, in this larger goal of trying to make sense of these types of seemingly incomprehensible, horrendous crimes. Right. And that's what I do. I try to make sense of it. And that's where I and people who are trained like me in the academic world, that's what distinguishes us from the journalistic world. Right? And I referred to this term before, and I'll state it again. You could write it down in your notebook. The first day you show up in grad school, this is Bryan Kohberger would have been taught this too, if he went to a decent grad school. And I assume there's a certain base level of professionalism, even the school of, or the Department of Criminology and Criminal Justice at Washington State. But as soon as you show up, they say, forget everything you think you know about the topic. We're starting from ground zero. Forget all the true crime books you read and got excited about. You want to come to grad school so you can play forensic files with all the DNA samples and go to the mystery home and look at all the evidence and gather it and live out your fantasy that you saw in all the movies. Throw that all out. Because the reality is that we are trying to explain why these events take place. The term in English is understanding, but in German, it's more comprehensive than that. The German term for that is verstehen. Let me say it again, more autocratically. Verstehen. It's usually translated as understanding, but it's more than understanding. It's empathy. It's like getting inside of an issue, into a question, living it. You understand? It's the difference from one of you bedroom guitarists playing a certain note or playing the weedle, 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 weedle on TikTok for 10 seconds. Says, wow, man, you can shred. That's the difference between that and listening to, let's say, Paul Kossoff, the late, he's dead, the guitarist from Free. Him playing one note with an incredible vibrato and sustain. He's living that note. That's the verstehen process. You can't explain it. It's like it's an aesthetic response as well as an intellectual one. Right? It's called verstehen. That's what we're after. And if you watch all the YouTube mavens, they don't go there. They're just describing, they're just rehashing stuff. They're just repeating material. It's an echo chamber. This is what the 20-year-old TikTok stars are doing, just repeating stuff that they read from legitimate journalists. And they are some like that. I mentioned when I'm going to tip my hat to him right now, Bryan Enton is one of them. He's mentioned here. I was surprised. They must have met him. Bryan Enton, he's on YouTube, okay? So I'm not down on everybody that's a TubeView person, right? After all, I'm competing on that level. I'm on my way to become a YouTube celebrity. By the way, thank you for pushing me to the 60,000 level of subscriptions. It's taken me 5 years to get there. Hopefully it doesn't take me another 5 years to get to the 100,000 mark, so I get my little plaque. But I sincerely, all kidding aside, thank you for your support, for pressing the subscribe and the like or the hate, whatever it is. My whole goal is to get a rise out of you, good, bad, or ugly. Right? Because all this other stuff, this is just information that just kind of washes over us. Right? But this case of the Idaho 4, as they call it, it has meaning, not just for the parents as survivors, the community, the nation, and the world, but it has meaning for our history, for our society, for our culture. And what is standing in the way of this meaning, ironically, is academic criminology. There, I said it. Hate me. I said it. Academic criminology is responsible for retarding Verstehen in matters of crime. And I'm not just talking about violent crime, spectacular crime, but street crime. I'm talking about biocrime. That's in my description here in the title, Biocrime. That includes the mass poisoning of the American population by Monsanto, which is a big investor of my former place of employment, the University of California, to the point where Janet Napolitano, who was from Homeland Security and all automatically showed up as president of the UC system, she said, okay, no more glyphosate, because they knew they were going to get sued, which they have. Thank you, Bobby Kennedy Jr. You were one of the people who developed the case against Monsanto and glyphosate. All right. So this is for you people who say, well, nothing's going to change. Nothing happens. No one's going to get indicted. Blah, blah, blah. Fire Pam Bondi. Fire Bongino. Fire. Yeah, I agree with all that, by the way. Right. The losing attitude is over. This is America. All right. This is a society of winners. Right. And we're going to probe some of these dark areas to see what we can glean from it to avoid it from persisting. Okay. And be patient. I will explain. I will detail for you and for myself, because I'm still trying to work through this as well. These ideas don't just enter to my brain, my mind, fully formed like Athena. I have to work through them as well, along with you. That's what I use these casts for, these YouTube shows, these talks. It's sort of like a head arrangement that I bring to the live audience so I can kind of work out the kinks and see where my improvisation needs to bring in something new and exciting and revelatory, to the point where maybe even I can even get into the zone, that is the stand zone, when you are perceiving something entirely new on an intellectual, aesthetic, and dare I say, spiritual level. And everyone here in the chat room who is watching this on repeat know what I'm talking about. If you listen to music, if you go to movies, even if you play your video games, you are feeling a simulation of that unique human endowment of aesthetic eureka recognition. It's a self-recognition. It's a recognition of humanity and of our role as creative beings and thinking people. Right. But not all thought and not all creative activity is necessarily productive. Sometimes it could be turned to great evil, as we are reminded from time to time. So let me continue then with that rather protracted introduction. And I also want you to stay to the end. I'm going to try to wrap it up before 90 minutes. I'm going to try to keep it down closer to the hour section. But I will, for the people who are just passing through, provide you a lead. See, if I was a real selfish writer or caster or content creator, I would keep this information to myself and I wouldn't share it with you, because it's a hot one. It's a hot lead and it's going to blow your minds, but you're going to have to wait till the very end. All right. And it's not gratuitous either, because as I told you, there are all these whack jobs, whack-doodles who got onto TikTok, which I barely have any knowledge of. Mea culpa, I'm ignorant. right? And I'm not the only one. I was gratified to know that some of the senior police people and the chief, I said, TikTok? What's that? And like his teenage son or the younger son of the chief fry, I'd say, well, Dad, this is what TikTok is, and this is how we with it kids like to use it. Right. So I'm learning too. Not that I'm going to, I have a TikTok account. Not that I'm going to become a TikToker. Maybe I should. Maybe I should activate my Instagram account. But I have my hands full with TubeView. I want to devote most of my attention to producing material here that has long-lasting consequences and relevance, not just information. All right, maybe I'm just rationalizing my laziness, but there's all these different types of technologies that came into play in the unspooling of this story, which is ongoing, by the way. This case should not be allowed to have a bow wrapped on it and put to bed. That doesn't mean that the wackadoodles should be just extending the discussion amongst themselves. They're free to do so, by the way. I don't think they should be censored. I'm not advocating that. But I'm saying that discernment and discrimination is important in any activity, and that includes consuming this material on so-called true crime. All right. With that caveat, let me explain some of the particulars of the case. Since I come from the academic world, I thought what I can contribute to the discussion is a direct insider's account of academic culture, of academic society. I would call it society. Most of even your smallest colleges and universities, they're like little towns. Some of them are like little cities. Most of them have their own zip code. Do you understand? They have their own medical facility. They are a town. They're like a municipality in everything but name only. So the University of Idaho, ostensibly, it's situated in Moscow, Idaho, but it's a world within a world. That's part of the, I won't say it's a problem. That's part of some of the hurdles that the people who were investigating the case had to jump over. They had to proceed very delicately in talking about these issues. I understand that to a large degree. I had a lot of contact myself. This is part of the insider information I'm providing you, okay? I had a lot of contact myself with the UC Davis Police Department. Not because they are investigating me, but I was filed a report with them. I got it in writing with my name and my testimony and the person's name who I had problems with in the classroom or in the office or in the hallway or some kind of encounter. Because if you are in the teaching profession, especially these days when most, and this is one of my suggestions, I want to see a survey done, not a mental health survey, a survey on how many students are on psychotropic drugs, but most of them now are on psychotropics. And I taught for something like over 40 years, so I could see the mental decline and the change in behavior of certain individuals. And I was getting to see people who was more like Bryan C. Kohberger. The people who were on the spectrum, they started appearing in larger and larger numbers year in year. But do Patterson and Ward talk about that? There's an allusion to, what do they call it? I have my notes here, my extensive stick-on notes. They just pass over it. Yeah, they mentioned Asperger's syndrome on page 87. By the way, I gave a talk on Dr. Hans Asperger a few years ago. The book's called Asperger's Children. He was an Austrian, but he was a Nazi doctor. He was creating Asperger's in the guise of trying to take care of all these orphans, these children. Asperger's, Dr. Hans Asperger. And now it's becoming ever increasing and commonplace. Yet the connection between Asperger's syndrome and acceleration and its appearance with the rise of all these psychotropic drugs and big pharma on the university campuses, which pimp these drugs to these young people, and violent crime, including suicide and homicide. I don't see that type of research coming out of so-called academic criminology. Do you? No, because Big Pharma provides the research money, and so do the Occupy CDC and the National Institutes of Mental Health. Those people are captured. It's not me saying that. This is Bobby Kennedy Jr. telling you this. They're compromised. They're captured. So they're not going to provide research money for that purpose. Instead, they just keep whipping up this true crime mania and subsidizing criminology departments, the research that goes nowhere except to replicate everything that you hate. Right? And I've been anti-woke for years and years. I was the first professor in the English-speaking world to go on the Alex Jones show to talk about weaponized multiculturalism. You were looking at the yellow man who first called the whistle on that. Vivek Ramaswamy with his woke incorporated stuff, that came much, much later. And I'm sure his handles saw my presentation on the Alex Jones show and said, yeah, Vivek Ramaswamy, this is the future. Let's write a book around it. By the way, that's how he made his fortune, an Indian immigrant. His parents were pharmaceuticals. So you're looking at a person who studied this from the inside out and has standing and authority in this issue. Unlike most of these wackadoodles are on the faculty at Washington State and the University of Idaho. I will put up my academic credentials, my scholarship, my curriculum vitae is called against any of them. Do you understand that? And that includes the foreigners who are teaching American criminology to American students, but it's not really has to do with anything about America. It's about feminist ideology. Okay, let me take this time to make this assertion. Criminology in America has been captured by academic feminist ideology. How do I know this? Well, in preparation for this talk, I looked at all the faculty names that came up in this fine piece of reportage. I found out the names of the professors. I went in there and I got all their curricula vitae. You know it as a resume. And I downloaded a lot of their articles. I even read a lot of those articles. Give me some credit. You know how difficult it is reading academic prose? Not to mention that most of it's garbage anyway. It's difficult to read garbage. And there's some of them are more quantitative oriented, but right, supposedly these empirical studies, you can lie with statistics, that. If you are subscribing to my X account, you see that I'm always forwarding or making available to my larger public articles that have been retracted, academic articles that have been retracted from the hard sciences mostly, but I would say that 75% of what's coming out of the social sciences and the humanities shouldn't even be published, let alone retracted. But Retraction Watch specifically looks at science, technology, engineering, mathematics, scholarship, right? So I'm seeing what we all know as DEI today, thanks to people like me who blew the whistle over 10 years ago on that one. We're seeing this having captured academic programs and giving degrees in criminology with people who are studying queer theory. And we're talking about the advancement of women in law enforcement, which I agree with, if they're qualified, right? So this helps to explain to people that finally, I tried to figure out what was going on, because when Black women start showing up in police chief uniforms with no qualifications, I mean, the hat doesn't even fit their small little head, and they're swimming in their little uniform. This is in San Francisco. Heather Fong, she's the first China woman that was the police chief of San Francisco, which is 1/3 Chinese. But the powers that be said, no, we're going to put Black people. We're going to put big Black bourgeois women as polices of the chiefs. Now, the reason why there isn't one up there in Idaho is because there's no Black people. And I'm not just making fun, okay? There's historical reasons why there's no Black people in Idaho. There's historical reasons why they have no Chinamen in Idaho. There's historical reasons why there's no Indians left in Idaho except on the reservations. Right? But we can't talk about that type of violent crime. At least the people in criminology cannot. They don't. I'll give you one example if you think I'm being too abstract and simplistic. Let's see, where is it? I don't have it at hand. But one of these professors, her name is Professor Melanie Angela Nuili. This is her right here with her students. This is at Washington State University, the Criminal Justice Program. I don't know if they're undergraduates or graduates or maybe it's a combination, but that is Professor Nuili on the right. And she's dressed up in an American, she's culturally appropriating the supposedly the Salem witch trial costumes. Take a good look at it. They're buying this garbage. She's even written a paper, it's on her CV, about the Salem witch. Supposedly she's going to be an expert on it. She was socialized in France. What the hell does she know? I would rather hear about the Belgium Ripper or some of the sensational crimes of the Second Empire. But no, she's going to teach American students about how women during the colonial period, American women, British, Scots, Welsh women, were cast out as witches. They were stigmatized. This is some sort of feminist statement, just like that show. What was it? Was it HBO or Netflix? The one where all the women are dressed up as witches and they're forced to have sex with men. Is that a Margaret Atwood show? I forgot the name of the show. Put it down there. Refresh my memories. I read some of the book. It was later made into a series. This is all part of the ideological conditioning of the young people. So this is Professor Melanie Angela Nuili. Let's take a look at her, because this is what I do. And this gives you some insight on the garbage that's being promulgated in the name of academic diversity. Here she is, Melanie Angela Nuili. She's an associate professor and chair. Why did I pick her? Because she was the one that wrote the letter telling Bryan Christopher Kohberger, sorry, Jack, but you're fired. And you know what happened after that? I'm not blaming her for him going on this rampage, but she was the one that administered this. And we're going to get to the guy who admitted him into the program, Kohberger into the program, in a moment. Right? I'm providing you some cultural forensic analytical access to this world that is given a free pass in this book and all the so-called true crime channels by Nancy Grace, by Ashley Banfield, whoever else. You will never see this yellow man on their shows. Because I'm going to ask them, hey, man, what about the massacres of Chinamen through the 19th century in the Washington Territory and in Idaho? What about those people who was buried in mass graves anonymously? What about the Great Indian Wars? The only remnant of that is a street in Moscow called Nez Perce or Nez Perce Street. There, they should have a street in Moscow, Idaho called Dead Hanging Chinaman Road, and put a frat house on that street. Okay, let's go back into Melanie Angela Nouilly before I bug out any further. So she's an associate professor and the chairman, Washington State Department of Criminal Justice and Criminology. She has a doctorate in the human sciences, 2008, at the Université de Rennes, not a particularly distinguished institution of higher learning that I know of, but what do I know? But she has a PhD in criminal justice, 2007, from Rutgers University. We'll give her a pass there. But she also has an MA in criminal justice. Guess where? Rutgers University. See the repetition here? You're going to see in the resume, CV, a lot of these people at the University of Idaho or Washington State, they went to one institution. And some of them are homegrown. They went to school there and then they hired them later as professors. How ingrown it is. It's also not usually the way that your top tier universities operate. They don't hire their own. They say, find a job somewhere else, make your name out in the field, and then maybe we'll hire you back. It's an earmark of the second-rate institutions where they have these people who are ingrown, and then they hire them. By the way, I think she was like a lecturer for like 6 or 7 years before she got into the tenure track as an assistant professor. See, this is all information that, and I'm not blaming them, they wouldn't know this, right? This is all information that these experts are missing. And it gives you an idea of how these people can entirely miss the fact that there was a, for lack of a better word, a psychopath, a sociopath amongst them. And they had ample opportunity to see his behavior. And it got so extreme, in fact, that Professor Nouilly had to finally say, sorry, we're not going to renew your contract for the spring semester, Mr. Kohberger. And as most of you know, he came in with a master's degree from DeSales University. I can talk to you a little bit about that if you like. It was an online program. Right? Some of you have gotten introduced inadvertently to online learning, distance learning as it's euphemistically called, during the COVID lockdown. How do you think that affected university? It was directed at them, students, to a large degree, because these are the professionals of the future. So get them into that stage of being locked down and jerked around and spiked early on, cripple them, and then in addition to that, saddle them with debt that they're going to be paying off for most of their adult life. And then bring foreigners like Malay Angelina Nouilly to pretend that she's some aggrieved woman from America. In her CV, she calls herself an immigrant. Well, you know what? I'm a fourth-generation American, and I'm still treated like an immigrant. That's why I keep referring to myself as a yellow person, just to irritate some of you people out there who don't like me saying that. And she did a paper. Where is it? I guess I set it aside, but she did it an article about early statehood of Washington and crime and violence. And guess what? There's no mention of the Chinamen. There's no mention of the massacres of the Indians. Just interpersonal violence between the cowboys and not even the Indians. This is her. And this is what they're learning at best, a really lopsided version of history. Okay, so I'm not going to bore you with the profile. You can look at it online. She's taught for 5 years at Idaho. If she's an associate professor, that means she has tenure. Okay. That doesn't mean she can go crazy and fall asleep on the job, as a lot of people think. And that doesn't mean she has complete academic freedom. That's a myth. It's just that she has a little bit of security where it comes to academic freedom, but it's not absolute. So she's at the second tier. The next step for her is professor, full professor, which, by the way, just for you, so you know, I retired at professor 4 level, University of California, full professor 4. I should have been an 8 or 9 if it wasn't for Richard Kim, Wendy Ho, Nolan Zane, and some other assholes at the Asian American Studies Department, the sellout department at the University of California, Davis, who suppressed me. So yeah, you could have a job there, but if you don't play ball with these characters, you're never going to get a raise or a promotion. And if you don't write the same type, the type of scholarship that's acceptable, you're going to be stymied, and they'll figure out a way to get rid of you. Hell, they might even sick a Bryan Kohberger type person after you. They will weaponize one of these characters who are high on psychotropic drugs and send them over to your office, my office. So you can tell I was always vigilant with what was going down. And you can tell from my comments that I was able and willing to protect myself every single moment I was on campus, whether it's in the library, the parking structure, in my office, in the hallway, or in the classroom. Do you understand that? That's me. If you are in a similar situation, you might consider that approach rather than saying, call 911 or the police are going to help us. Call the detectives, call the FBI, call the dean of students. Call him, please. He's going to rescue us. No, man, you are on your own. Do you understand that? You're responsible for your own protection, your own self-protection, and protection of those around you. Because this is what your average dean of students is like. I'm not picking on this one guy at the University of Idaho. He's right out of central casting. He's like most of the deans of students I've ever run across. They're a bunch of clowns. Don't get fooled by the term dean, okay? And even within the academic culture, if you're the dean of students, you're never going to be the chancellor. You're never going to be the president. You're never going to be taken seriously. You're the dean of students. I had one colleague from Latinx studies who thought she was going to become the first Latina president of UC Davis, but she first was dean of students, and that ruined her career. Now she's the president of Cal State Bakersfield or something like that. Because their job is pacification, to entertain the students, to look over all the sororities and the fraternities, and if someone makes a complaint about the food, he'll talk to the people that have the crooked contract to supply food and beverage to the university, and he makes sure that he has good relationships with the booster club, the pep club. Maybe he supplies football players to the booster club, like Jerry Sandusky at Penn. That type of fun stuff. that we associate with college, right? So when something like this falls into his lap, he's going to collapse into a puddle of confusion. Here, this explains it a lot better than I could ever verbalize.
Oh, that's 10. Okay. I'm Blaine Eccles, Dean of Students, and we're here at Vandal Move-In. We're excited for today. It's going to be awesome. Go Vandals!
What are some of the most common questions people ask you when they're coming in on move-in day?
How do I get one of those cards? Where do I go eat? And when do I get to meet the rest of the students on my floor? And so we've got floor meetings tonight. The students are going to get to know one another about 7 o'clock, I think, and it's going to be a great day. Help with that one lamp you're carrying? Are you going to make it? Hi, I'm Blaine. I'm the Dean of Students. Can I help you move in? Is that all right?
Sure, if you want to.
That's what we do here, absolutely. What's your name?
KJ.
There we go.
Wait, you're saying that's the Jimmy John's menu item right there?
Yeah, it's the drive-through menu.
That's
Okay.
incredible.
Yeah, I know. We're getting there.
Can I get a little moment with you?
Yeah.
Hi.
Go Vandals. Get on in here, KJ. All right. Moment of truth. Welcome home, brother.
Well, you get the idea. You're basically, if you're a dean of students, you're a clown. And the profile is, and again, I don't mean to be disparaging, but the profile of a dean of students, that's almost always a black man or woman. Right. Not in Idaho because they can't find enough black people to do it. But it's always a gay or a lesbian person. That's a dean of students because they want to show diversity and inclusion and equity. And they're going to wear a little clown outfit and help you move into your dorm room and handle all your little teenage postpartum problems. And that's okay. I understand. I went through the process myself. I get it. You know, you're away from home and you're on your way. You're going to become a dentist or work in a biolab or in digital marketing. You're going to become a YouTube celebrity. I get it. I understand that. You're going to study criminology, and your teaching assistant is going to be Bryan C. Kohberger. And if you're a woman, he's going to grade you harder and more critically than he will if you were a male student. That's according to this. Maybe it's true. I don't know. But time and time again, Patterson and Ward want us to get the understanding that Bryan C. Kohberger was 1, a misogynist, 2, a homophobe, and 3, an incel. These are terms that are invoked over and over again. These are just labels that are slapped on. And I hope you know I'm not defending Bryan C. Kohberger. Do you understand that? But I'm saying that these labels don't really explain anything. And you have to understand where the concept of incel came from. I'm cultural forensics. I look into these types of questions. It was invented by some TikTok or some online 20-year-old girl from Canada who referred to Elliot Rodger as an incel, short for involuntary celibate. And now it's entered into the literature. People are writing academic papers about the incel. There's a book that I returned it recently, published by an academic press, Routledge. Thank you, Patreon people, but I didn't want to take $30 out of my account to pay for this piece of garbage. I returned it because it was mostly a questionnaire and there was no substance. The point is the whole concept of incel is not just questionable, it doesn't have any validity. It's like if I called you, oh, you're a bread loaf. Oh, don't talk to her. She's a bread loaf. It's just it's an arbitrary designation. It sounds good, but you can't build a whole theory from it and call it criminology. You see, and on it goes. It's not about verstehen. It's about inventing labels and slapping it on people. And that's what Professor Melanie Angela Nouilly, that's what she does. She says she does comparative research on violence and violent death. How appropriate. And you can read it. It shows you which courses she teaches. It has her select publications. For my patrons, I will post some of these publications. Many of them are behind a paywall. You can't find it very easily, but maybe you'll want to read it or pass it on to one of your children, adult children at the university, and they can write a paper based on this academic research. I have a really good topic for, because the fall quarter semester is about ready to start, isn't it, around the country? The new academic year is about ready to start. You can have a research paper on how come criminology fails to stem the acceleration of violent serial crime and mass murder. Actually, I don't write that paper. You're going to get a D on it. You're going to get a C because the professor's going to take it personally. But you see the point I'm making here? It's not about stemming crime. It's not about criminal. It's about advancing yourself because you are a French woman. You're a foreigner. You fit the box on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And she's not the only French. There's another one. Her name is Amélie Pédu. There's nothing against French people here. But what are the odds? Two French women? What kind of relationship do they have here? Is the Sûreté involved in Idaho? Because I know Idaho trains with foreign troops and security and special forces from all over the world. In fact, that part of the country, Idaho, is saturated with special forces people. That's why I will not rule out the possibility there was some sort of connection between drug cartels. For one thing, I think 2 or 3 of the parents of the victims, and again, I apologize for invoking the names or the memory of victims, but I'm trying to get to some very important truths here. But the parents of 2 or 3, not all of them, the victims had been in and out of jail because of drug charges. So they are part of a second, maybe third generation of Americans now who are part of the drug addict society. But I do not see Professor Nouilly addressing that, or any of these other characters. Here's the about us. If you want to read about the program you're interested about enrolling or taking courses, auditing courses, there's a whole historical background on the program. There's the faculty, the graduate director, Dale Willits. He was the guy that, in this book, he's freaking out once it's revealed that one of the students from criminology at Washington State, Bryan Kohberger, has been ID'd and arrested as the perpetrator. He said, "Oh my gosh, please save me, Dean of Students or Mr. Policeman. I'm the one who admitted him. He signed off on it." And he's supposed to be an expert in criminology. And I looked at his scholarship. I have articles. I'll post them on Patreon because I don't want to take up time here. But it's the same liberal ideological DEI type of material. He's talking about racism in the police department. Like I told, there are hardly any Latinos in that part of Idaho. They all are. They're everywhere. But we're not talking about LA or Sacramento or other parts of the country. There's hardly any blacks. There's hardly any Asians. There's probably some Asian women married to white guys or something. But that's about it. But he's talking about as if Moscow, Idaho was like the inner city. Like he's dealing with Washington, D.C. type criminality. Right. But he's nowhere near it. Don't get me wrong. He's living in a beautiful part of the country. You can go fishing on the weekends, go camping, beautiful fresh air. Man, they got it made. You can have yourself an off-road vehicle, maybe a motorcycle even. And you can have little side pieces with students. Like this one guy, what's his name? I wrote it down. In doing the prep work, there was a murder off campus with a professor at let's see here. Sorry, I'm not more organized. His name was Ernesto Bustamante. Professor Ernesto Bustamante murdered a lover of his that told him it was over. I just wanted to see what it was like sleeping with a Latino. So, but that's okay. I'm moving on. And he killed her. He murdered her and then he killed himself. This is in 2010. This is at he was in the psychology department. Fancy that. This is in Moscow, the University of Idaho. And this is in the book. So I found the whole case study. Got many articles related to it. So they have in a small town as it is, and small universities, they already have a history of extreme violence there. So they were not hit with something absolutely new. It was a pattern. So where does that pattern come from? Well, my study of American history, American civilization, I've said it before, and I know it irritates people when I refer to race and ethnicity in American society, because supposedly we're over that, because Alex Jones and all these right-wing commentators say, we're tired as white people, we're tired of being blamed for everything. Well, I'm not blaming anybody, because guess what? In other countries, like in the Asian world, China, Japan, Vietnam, Cambodia, they've been involved with some pretty horrendous mass murders and crimes, justified in terms of military action or not, or as crime. Okay, so I understand that, right? But this is part of the fabric of American society. And none of these criminologists go anywhere close to what I've been presenting to you week after week after week, especially in the more recent couple months now, where I've been specializing on true crime, because I'm trying to get to the Vestan of it instead of listening to all these pop-up pundits repeat a bunch of nonsense in their vocal fry voice. See, there's this woman, she's from Brown University. She's in her late 20s. I think she was one of these liberal bloggers or something, but she does true crime. She's on, I didn't take the time to do it. I could have put her on there, but she's pontificating about Kohberger, and she's going, yeah, Bryan Kohberger. Okay, this is why I'm spending so much time and effort to compete with these people who are just clogging up the giant sewer. All right, so let's get off of the personalities a little bit and talk a little bit about the Washington State Criminal Justice Program. Then we're going to go over to a little earlier, the Criminal Justice Program at DeSales University. And there's a reason why people like Kohberger are gravitating to it. There's going to be more Kohbergers who are going to be enrolling in criminal justice or criminology at the different institutions, right? Because I will tell you, and I did the research on it from a couple different sources, criminal justice as an undergraduate major is growing at the rate of 12% per year. Each year, it grows by 12%. Most academic majors would say, wow, we're doing something right. We need more money. It's a bigger budget for us. Where everybody wants to be in our program because we have the great Catherine Ramsland on our faculty of DeSales University, and she's the featured guest on all these gossip shows. Nancy Grace, you're going to see Catherine. I've shown her before, so I'm not going to show her face again. She was one of Kohberger's professors. She passed him through at DeSales University. One of his professors said he's only one of two people who have passed through DeSales that I would write a letter of recommendation to enter a doctoral program. And she was another one of those retreads, I guess. Catherine Ramsland is a retread. I think she started out as a secretary, not that's a bad, or an editorial assistant for John Douglas or Rensselaer, one of these true crime guys early on, and she realized, shoot, I can do this. So then she remade herself into a true crime maven. That's Catherine Ramsland. And then she, I think from what I can tell, it's really her that created and marketed and sold to the administration of DeSales University this criminal justice program, including a graduate program, master's online. And I looked to see what the tuition is for the online master. It's something like $30,000 for one academic year to get a master's degree online on your computer. It might be more now. So it's a money-making deal. And again, I don't want to cast aspersions on people's dreams, their hopes, their aspirations, right? I'm just calling to question why this particular area, academic criminology, is growing by leaps and bounds. And other enrollments in other areas, it's flattened out. And I'm also asking the question is why and how and for what reason is academic criminology being taken over or occupied by academic feminist ideology and liberal ideology? If you read the articles by Professor Willits and all these other characters, it's all about police oppression and minorities being oppressed and being the victims of systemic racism. You know the whole story, but they're teaching there. And they're teaching a whole new generation of cops, law enforcement, and attorneys. They're conditioning an environment of societal collapse and the collapse of the criminal justice system via the criminology studies program and emphasis and degree. Do you understand? This is a dire warning that I am issuing to anybody who's watching me, right? All 1,500. By the way, I think my previous video went over to 11,000. Thank you very much. But it seems to kind of hit a wall around 10,000. But that's okay, because each one of those persons are going to raise these issues to someone else. That's all I care about. Right? We have all the retold comedians like Joe Rogan and Crowder and Jimmy Dore and Bill Maher complain about the same liberal DEI woke material. We have them doing that ad nauseum, right? But they're not talking about criminology being taken over. I am. And if they're not talking about it, they have no idea of what's coming down the pike in the future generation of district attorneys, public prosecutors, judges, state legislators, and federal elected officials and law enforcement people at the federal, state, or local levels. You have no idea where we're heading. unless you're listening to this talk that I am providing to you as a public service, as someone who's studied this from the inside out for decades, and who has been proven right time and time again where it comes to these issues, whether it's big pharma, weaponized multiculturalism, GLBTQ weaponization, all of that. I've been there and done that early on. And I'm on this one right now. And you who are watching this are on the inside track now. So start talking it up. Say, what are they doing in criminology? If you have a son or daughter, adult daughter, who's going to the universities, well, I'm going to start a criminology. You better show them what's going on here. Because when they show up, they're going to be greeted with some dean of students in a clown outfit, and you're going to be learning about gay and lesbian sexuality in the criminal justice system. They're going to turn you loose. And you go, what? Okay, I'm running out of time. So let's go back to this. That's really slick. And when I talked about X-Files and Forensic Files and all these criminological Netflix programs and the whole true crime fascination, you don't think the marketing people at DeSales University know that this is where it's heading and that they're going to capitalize it or they're not going to capitalize it? No, they're going to be there. Let's take a look at this. I just saw this promotional video today at the last moment as I was prepping here. And it looks like it's really professional media production. It's like an episode of Forensic Files, the TV show, which, by the way, I was a fan of as well, just like you were. Here we go. Wow. It's like a Roger Corman slasher movie, isn't it? That's how they're marketing the so-called criminal justice criminology program at DeSales University. It's a moneymaker. The administration's not going to say anything negative about it. They're going to cover it up. When the information comes out that one of our own is the killer or he's been accused, they go into information lockdown. Nothing comes in or out of the university because these types of events at the university are routine. Do you understand that? Routine. There was a serial killer running around in Davis. He was an illegal. In Davis, California, where I used to lecture about this phenomenon of these pharmaceutical biosocial experiments let loose into the field to terrorize the community. That's why I call them lab leaks. He's been convicted. His name is Carlos Dominguez. He killed 3 and he wounded 1. This is at Davis. He had just been kicked out of UC Davis as an undergrad. He's a legal immigrant. He came here to the U.S. as a quote unquote unaccompanied minor. Yeah, and sure, he was probably sexually abused and buggered by these humanitarian organizations that brought him in and resettled him. He probably had to grab his ankles and subject himself to all kinds of abuse, sexual abuse while he was at UC Davis by all the gay administrators, whoever they might be. Right? There's probably all these mitigating circumstances that would come out in the trial. But nonetheless, 3 people are dead and one was severely wounded. This is in Davis. This is just one example. I don't have time to go through the case. Maybe I'll do a follow-up on that later. Now, in the interest of time, we move on to a sort of a sidebar. It's not really side, it's really germane. There is a woman who's a TikToker, one of the reviled, she's referred to as a TikTok sleuth. Like that's the lowest of the low. By the way, I'm not sure that I can be as dismissive of the TikTokers or the YouTubers as these guys are. Right? Because they got the big contracts from Vanity Fair and Condé Nast publications and all the big boys in London and in New York City. They've got all that all sealed up. Right? But I'm more of the mind of, I guess her name was Alethea. I'm not mispronouncing her name, Goncalves, who she's that woman that we all know and respect for her passionate address to Bryan Kohberger during the sentencing session presided over by the judge. Well, she was doing her own independent research, looking at all these TikTok accounts and Facebook accounts. In fact, there were 2 women in Idaho and Moscow who ran 10 different Facebook groups on true crime. Now, that was a big surprise to me. That's how pervasive this pursuit is. Anyway, there was another woman that I wanted to talk about was following the case. Her name is Ashley Gillard, and she accused a professor at the University of Idaho for being involved in the killing. I'll let the local news report get into it here.
Schofield, an associate professor and chair of the history department at the University of Idaho, filed a
Let me, sorry, I have to remove that.
Saying that attorneys for Rebecca Schofield, an associate professor and chair of the history department at the University of Idaho, filed a lawsuit earlier this month saying that a TikTok user, Ashley Gillard, who has more than 100,000 followers, wrongfully and with no basis claimed that Schofield was a murderer. After sending 2 cease and desist letters, similar videos by the TikTok user are still online, and now it appears that this fight will play out in court. We spoke to a Seattle-based First Amendment lawyer about this.
But when you're out there in the public sphere, and when you're on TikTok with hundreds of thousands of viewers out there, you have a responsibility to the public and frankly to yourself that you don't start publishing things recklessly, negligently, or intentionally, unless you have some basis to believe in it.
Earlier this week, Moscow police released a statement saying that they, quote, do not believe the professor was involved. Attorneys for the professor say she was out of town at the time of the November 13 murders, says they can prove that, and says that she never met with or has any relationship with any of the students who are now victims of that murder. As for the TikToker, Gillard doesn't appear to be backing down on any of these claims. In a video posted 3 days ago, she says she does have information, and she says that will come out in court. Live in studio, Sebastian Robertson, King 5 News.
I don't know the status of the case. I downloaded all the lawsuits information that's available online, all the coverage of it. I looked up also, as in the case of these people I've talked about, Professor Willits, Professor Nuili, and Professor Pignou. who are people that we love to hate if you are on the conservative side, because they're like part of the 95% libtard that are professors and poisoning the minds of all these upstanding, fine, decent, healthy undergraduates. But I looked up this woman here. See, what's her name? Schofield, Rebecca Schofield. And guess, yeah, it's predictable. She's writing about GLBTQ studies. She's I think, the chair of the history department. It's a different department. It's not criminology. It's in the history, but they're all doing the same thing across all the different academic departments. She has like 2 or 3 articles. She probably cannibalizes her own work about chaps. You know, the stuff that the garments that the cowboys wear or used to wear, and how in the GLBT, the gay community, the gay pride community, like in San Francisco and in Boys Town in LA, they like to parade around in their leather chaps with no underpants on so they could see their bareback bottom hanging out. She wrote academic articles about that. I'll put it on my Patreon for you, just so you know that I'm not pulling your leg or your butt cheeks, whatever you prefer. She wrote a book about chaps. And her scholarships seem to be like echoing the whole broke back gay cowboy motif out in Idaho. So they're even queering the mountain man. They're turning all them lumberjacks into gays. In the classroom, at least. I think when they go to the bars and they meet up with women and they go dancing and clubbing and go to the grub truck and have their fraternities, they're probably pursuing just normal sexuality, right? With a little bit of drugs, a little bit of alcohol. I don't know. That's such an alien world for me. I'm just guessing, right? I'll just have to watch a Roger Corman movie, Slaughter at the Slumber Party, slasher, student nurses, co-ed, mass murder, Roger Corman movies that people like Quentin Tarantino masturbate to, right? Because that's part of the culture. I think Roger Corman and his people were up to some really weird stuff when they were out in the Philippines. Right. I'm not going to go public with it on YouTube, but you kind of can infer what's going on there. Right. With the trafficking, the drugs, and the types of movies that are only rumored to exist. This is all part of the discussion here, so far as I'm concerned. And then Professor Schofield of the history department, thinks she's being avant-garde by talking about men wearing leather chaps so their naked butt cheeks can ride up against the leather saddle, up and down like a Brokeback Mountain. All right. So when I first heard of this woman, TikToker, who was outing this woman here, I said, God, I think I know who it is. And it was not her. It was someone else I knew who teaches at the University of Idaho. And his name has never come up until today. Remember at the outset of this talk, I said I'm going to give you a lead, you researchers out there, a lead of a person, a connection to the University of Idaho that slipped the attention of everybody except Professor Hamamoto. Whether he has a connection to the case or not, I don't know. But it is quite eerie that he wrote a book. He was a guy in the history department who wrote a book about the most evil man, self-proclaimed, in the world, the great beast, Aleister Crowley. This is not his book. This is another full-length biography. This is written by a guy named Richard Kaczynski, I tried to find out if he was related to Ted Kaczynski, because that's kind of an unusual name. It's a rare name, but I haven't been able to figure that out. It's a really good book, though. Unfortunately, this guy is totally read into the program. He is a student of Thelema. Now, the person that I'm about to introduce you to, I don't know if he is read into the Thelemic dark magic program or not. I'll leave that for you to research, but he taught at the University of Idaho in the history department. Maybe he would have been a good resource to find out what's really going on with these people like Bryan C. Kohberger running around. Because I think the occult and the ritualistic element needs to be examined, not just in this case, but in a lot of these seemingly so-called serial killer or mass murder scenarios. Right. By the way, there was I hate to mention this, but 2 days before the murder, there was a dog that was found skinned on someone's porch in Moscow. A family pet. Man, there's just some very strange occultic weirdness going on in American society. It's percolating up. Maybe Professor Nwili is correct about the witch trials, but she's giving it the wrong interpretation. She thinks it's a feminist issue. I think it's a satanic issue. And maybe that's why they're hiring these women with Rosicrucian cultures. France is the home of Rosy Croix, the Rosy Cross, Rosicrucian. They have a whole history of occultic thought. Maybe that's why they're importing them. I'm not saying that is the reason. I'm just speculating. But anyway, let's take a look at this one character who wrote a book called Agent 666, a biography of one Aleister Crowley. He was a British agent. So when I'm talking about state crimes, state criminality, military being involved in these operations, Aleister Crowley is a case study. He was a British intelligence asset. He would cast black magic spells against members of the Third Reich, including Adolf Aloysius Hitler. Casting spells and sigils, all that. It's in the literature. It's in the book. I'm not an expert, but I've read most of this material here. Unlike these whack jobs in the criminology department, I read in this area because I think it's important in understanding the true criminology of American culture and society and politics. So let's take a look here. You can follow this up on your own.
Hi, I'd like to introduce Professor Spence, who wrote this fantastic book that I bought, Secret Agent 666, the Aleister Crowley, British intelligence and the occult. So where are you? You're a professor in Idaho, I think it is.
I'm actually retired. So I've been retired for a couple of years from the University of Idaho, which is in Moscow, Idaho.
Well, okay. So what were you a professor in? What was your area?
I was a professor of history.
Okay.
And so in terms of bona fides, I guess, I really do have a PhD for whatever that is worth. Okay. You have to say that because sometimes people say they do and they don't necessarily have one. But yes, I got my PhD in history and MAs and BAs before that, pretty much from the University of California, Santa Barbara. Started teaching at the University of Idaho after a few other stints elsewhere in 1986, and was there until I retired in 2020. And my basic, if you wanted to know what was your sort of area of academic training? Well, my area of academic training was mostly, you could say very broadly, modern European history, more to the point, Eastern Europe and modern Russia. So I was very interested in anything that had to do with the Russian Revolution. That's kind of the the starting point where all of my subsequent unhealthy research interests derive from.
Sure, sure.
And once you start studying something like the Russian Revolution, you run across all sorts of connections, groups elsewhere. I mean, one of the first things that you tend to learn about any revolution, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise, is that if you have a revolution, you have a conspiracy. Okay, so keep in mind, not all conspiracies are theories. In fact, they're pretty much what we make up in terms of history. And the reason for that is that if you're plotting, if you plot, another word for conspiracy.
Oh, that's the point that I wanted to leave you with. We are also going through a Russian Revolution here in America, but these are the descendants of the Bolsheviks that formed the intellectual backbone of American academia, journalism, and entertainment. They're otherwise known as Sabbatean Frankists. Okay, I don't want to put words into the professor's mouth here, but it's the same group of people that keep resurfacing in these revolutionary conditions. And we're undergoing one right now. And it's certainly not the Department of Criminology at DeSales University or Washington University or Georgetown, wherever it might be, that are going to ever address that, because these institutions have been captured. And on that, I would like to leave you with today's talk. I hope you can pick through it and find something of use to your own work. I will be posting some of these select articles on my Patreon. Thank you again for your support in this area. And God willing, I'll be back with you next Sunday. Thank you very much. Peace.